I used to think the worst thing that could happen to you was losing someone. I was wrong. The worst thing is finding them again and realizing the person you fell in love with was never who you thought they were. This isn't a story about a stranger. It's a story about the one person in my life I never had to explain myself to. The one who knew which silences meant leave me alone and which ones meant please don't. Her name was Mara, and by the end of this you'll understand why I can't say that name without my voice doing this. Let me start at the beginning, because you need to know who we were before you'll understand what we became and what we found out we'd always been. Chapter 1. The girl 2 doors down I was 8 years old when the moving truck pulled up 2 houses down from ours. I remember it because my mother made me bring over a plate of banana bread, and I remember hating that job with the kind of specific childhood hatred you only feel once. A girl answered the door. Skinned knee, missing tooth, holding a shoebox like it, contained something classified. "What's in the box?" I asked, because apparently that's how I introduced myself at 8. "None of your business," she said. Then, after a beat, Beatles. "Wanna see?" That was Mara. That was the whole friendship right there. In the first 90 seconds, she didn't perform politeness for me, and I didn't expect her to. We were friends by the end of that week and inseparable by the end of that summer. We grew up 2 doors apart. I knew her mother's laugh before I knew most of my cousins' names. She knew that I couldn't sleep during thunderstorms until I was almost 12, and she never once made me feel small for it. She'd just show up at my window with her dad's old radio, and we'd listen to static together until the storm passed. There's a particular kind of closeness that only happens when nobody's trying to impress anybody. We weren't destined or fated or any of the words people use in hindsight to make a friendship sound like it was always secretly a love story. We were just there for each other, year after year, in the unglamorous way real people are. But I have to tell you about my sister now, because this story doesn't make sense without her. Chapter 2. Lily. I had a little sister. Lily. 4 years younger than me, all elbows and stubbornness, the kind of kid who negotiated her bedtime like she was arguing in front of a judge. When I was 14 and she was 10, our parents split up. Badly, the kind of badly that involves lawyers raising their voices in hallways. My mother's health wasn't good even before that. She'd struggled for years with what the adults called bad spells, and what I now understand were breakdowns she was never given the resources to recover from. My father moved out. Then he moved further. Then he stopped calling. For about 8 months, it was just my mother, Lily, and me. Then it wasn't even that. I don't like telling this part, so I'll tell it quickly and we can move on together. My mother had a collapse, a real one, the kind that involves an ambulance, during a period when there was no family close enough to step in fast. Child services got involved. I was 14, considered old enough to stay with a family friend temporarily. Lily was 10, and there wasn't a fast placement for both of us together. They told me it would be temporary. It wasn't. The system moved her twice in 4 months. By the time my mother recovered enough to fight for custody, the second family had already begun adoption proceedings, out of state, and the paperwork outran us. I remember my mother on the phone for hours, my father nowhere, a caseworker's voice that was kind but final. I was 14 years old, and one day I had a sister, and a season later I didn't. No goodbye that either of us got to choose. No address. A closed file is what they called it. Closed. Like a door you didn't get to walk through one last time. I used to sit on my roof at night. You could see Mara's window from up there, and I wouldn't say anything. I'd just sit. And more nights than not, her light would come on, and a few minutes later she'd be up there with me, in a jacket over her pajamas, not saying anything either. She never once tried to fix it with words. She just made sure I wasn't up there alone. I think that's the night I started loving her, if I'm honest. Not in the way people mean when they say that word in movies, in the quieter way. The way where you realize someone has decided without being asked to sit in your worst hour with you. But we were kids. And kids don't know what to do with feelings like that, so we did what kids do. We buried it under a decade of ordinary life and called it friendship. Because friendship was safer, and because I think some part of both of us knew that if we ever said the real thing out loud, we couldn't take it back. Chapter 3. 10 years. In passing, here's the thing nobody tells you about slow burns. They don't feel like burning. They feel like Tuesdays. Mara and I went to different colleges but came home every holiday. We texted about nothing. A weird bird outside her apartment, a bad decision involving gas station sushi, whether pineapple belonged on pizza, which was a fight we had at least once a year on principle. She became a nurse. I became an electrician, then eventually ran my own small crew. We dated other people. I want to be honest about that because this isn't a story where we pined silently for a decade like a couple of idiots. I had a 2-year relationship in my mid-20s that ended amicably. She had one that didn't end amicably at all, and I was the one who picked her up at 1 a.m. from a parking lot outside his apartment, and neither of us said much on the drive. And I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my hand ached the next day. Not from driving. There's a version of this story where I tell you the tension was obvious the whole time, where every glance was loaded and every silence was electric. That's not quite true. Mostly it was just good, easy. She was my person to call when something went right and my person to sit with when something went wrong. And for years, that was enough because I didn't let myself ask whether it could be more. What changed? It wasn't a single moment. It was an accumulation. It was noticing at 29 that I compared every date I went on to an evening doing absolutely nothing with Mara on her couch, badly ranked reality TV, cheap wine, her feet in my lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. It was noticing that I texted her the second anything good or bad happened to me, before I texted anyone else, before I even fully processed it myself. It was noticing, one Tuesday in October, watching her laugh at something stupid I'd said, that I wasn't just fond of her, I was in love with her. Had been probably for longer than I'd been willing to count. Chapter 4. The night I almost said it, I almost told her in November. We were at her place, and it had started raining the way it does right before it turns to sleet, and she'd made tea neither of us was drinking, and there was a pause in the conversation that felt different from our usual pauses. Longer, warmer, like the air itself was waiting on something. "You've got that look," she said. "What look?" "The one where you're about to say something and then you don't." I laughed it off. I told myself it was because I didn't want to ruin 21 years of friendship on a gamble. That was true. But there was something else underneath it. Something I couldn't name at the time and can now. Some part of me had always felt like Mara understood me in a way that went past normal closeness. Past even best friend closeness. A kind of recognition I'd never been able to explain, and honestly, never really tried to. I told myself it was just how deep we went as friends. I was wrong about that too. But not in the way you're bracing for. Stay with me. Chapter 5. The locket. It was February when I first really looked at the locket. Mara had worn it as long as I'd known her. A small oval, gold-plated, a little scratched at the edges. The kind of thing that had clearly been through a lot of childhood before it ever met me. I'd asked about it once, years earlier, back when we were teenagers. "It's from before," she'd said. "Before my parents." I don't actually remember getting it. I hadn't pushed. Mara didn't like to talk about the early stretch of her life. She'd been adopted at 8, and the years before that were, in her words, foggy on purpose. Her adoptive parents were wonderful, warm people who I'd known most of my life, and Mara loved them without complication. The years before them, she simply didn't discuss. I respected that. Everybody's allowed a locked door, but that February, we were at her parents' house for a birthday dinner, and the locket caught the light a certain way, and something about it snagged on a memory I couldn't immediately place, a itch behind my ribs. I didn't say anything. I just kept looking at it through dinner, and I couldn't have told you why. Later that night, driving home, it hit me. Not gently, it hit me like a physical thing, both hands on the wheel, having to pull over onto the shoulder because my vision had gone strange at the edges. My mother had a locket just like that, had bought 2, matching, one for herself and one small enough for a child. She'd put an old photograph in each. Her and my sister. Right before Lily left the house for what was supposed to be a few weeks, I sat on that shoulder for 20 minutes, telling myself it was a coincidence. Lockets aren't rare. Ovals aren't rare. Gold plating isn't rare. But foster kids get moved, and things get lost, and sometimes things don't get lost. Sometimes a caseworker lets a 10-year-old girl keep the one object she's clutching like a life raft because even in an overwhelmed system, somebody has a moment of mercy, and Mara had been placed into her adoptive family at 8 years old, with no memory of anything before. In this same county, in this same overloaded system, at almost exactly the right time. I didn't sleep that night. Chapter 6. What I was afraid to ask. I want to be honest with you about the week that followed, because it wasn't romantic, it wasn't cinematic, it was one of the most disorienting weeks of my life. Because here's the impossible position I was in. I was in love with this woman. I had been building, slowly, quietly, toward telling her that. And now there was a very real, very specific possibility sitting in my chest that the woman I loved was not a woman I'd fallen for by chance. She might be my sister. I didn't say anything for 6 days. I want you to sit with that, because I sat with it. 6 days of seeing her, texting her, sitting across from her at dinner, while carrying something that could reframe both of our entire lives, and not knowing which answer I was hoping for. Part of me, and I'm not proud of this, but this is an honest telling, part of me hoped I was wrong. Because if I was wrong, I got to keep the version of the future I'd started, quietly, secretly to imagine. And part of me, the part that had spent 15 years wondering what happened to a 10-year-old girl with her elbows and her stubbornness, hoped so badly that I was right that it physically hurt. Those two hopes do not belong in the same chest. But grief and love have never respected boundaries like that. They never have, in my experience. On the 7th day, I called my mother. Chapter 7. My mother's voice. My mother is a careful woman now. Recovered, steady, the kind of steady you only get by rebuilding yourself from a low floor. When I told her what I suspected, there was a silence on the phone so long I thought the call had dropped. "Say the name again," she said finally. Mara Whitfield. Adopted at 8 in county by the Whitfields over on. "I need you to describe the locket," my mother said, and her voice had gone somewhere else entirely, somewhere she hadn't been in 15 years. I described it. The oval. The scratch on the left edge, shaped like a tiny crescent, that Mara always said looked like a moon. My mother made a sound I had never heard her make before, not once, in my whole life. "I did that scratch," she whispered, "with my thumbnail." The clasp used to catch and I filed it down so it wouldn't pinch her neck. I remember doing it in the kitchen the week before. She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. We didn't know for certain. Not yet. A scratch and an oval locket and a timeline that lined up wasn't proof. Not in any court. Not in any DNA lab. But my mother's voice on that call was the closest thing to proof I've ever heard in my life, and some part of me had already stopped needing more. "You have to tell her," my mother said. And Daniel. That's me, by the way. I realize I never said. You have to tell her before whatever else it is you've been about to tell her. She deserves the truth first. Not a version of it wrapped around your feelings. My mother knew me well enough, even from a distance, to know exactly what I'd been carrying into that year with Mara. She didn't say anything else about it. She didn't have to. Chapter 8. The conversation. I asked Mara to meet me at the lake we used to go to as kids. The one with the collapsed dock nobody ever fixed. Neutral, familiar, ours. She knew something was wrong before I said a word. 21 years of reading each other will do that. "You're scaring me," she said. "Just say it." "Can I see your locket?" She frowned, but she took it off, a little confused, a little wary, and handed it to me. I turned it over. The crescent scratch on the left edge caught the low sun exactly the way I remembered. "Mara, do you remember anything at all? Anything from before you were 8? Her jaw tightened, the way it always did when we got near that locked door. "I told you. It's foggy on purpose. I need you to try. Please, this matters more than I can explain right now." She closed her eyes, and after a long, long silence, she said something in a voice I'd never heard her use. Small, young, like it was coming from a version of her I'd never met. "There was a boy," she said. "Older than me. He used to sit on a roof at night when it stormed. I used to bring a radio up there." I couldn't speak. She opened her eyes and saw whatever was happening on my face, and I watched 21 years of certainty about who she was start to come apart in real time. "Daniel," she said, and her voice was shaking now. "Why do I remember that? Why do I remember you?" Chapter 9. What we found out. We didn't guess at it after that. We couldn't live inside a maybe. Within 3 weeks, we had a DNA test, the kind you can order privately and have expedited if you're willing to pay for it and unable to wait. I remember the two of us sitting in my truck in a parking lot, both of our phones open to the same result page, neither of us willing to be the one to tap it. "I'll do it," she said. And she did. "I don't need to walk you through the exact percentages. I think you already know what the number said. Full siblings. Confirmed beyond any reasonable doubt, beyond any statistical fog." Mara. Lily put the phone down on the dashboard and put both hands over her face, and I did the only thing I knew how to do, which was the same thing I'd have done at 10 years old if I'd known where to find her. I put my arms around her and held on like the world might try to take her again if I loosened my grip. We sat like that for a long time, long enough that the sun moved. Long enough that I stopped being able to tell whether the sounds she was making were grief or relief, and I think the honest answer is that they were both, tangled together the way those two things always are when you've been missing someone for 15 years without a name for the missing. Chapter 10. What I never got to say. I have to be honest with you about the part of this that nobody warns you is coming. Somewhere in that parking lot, in that hour, I understood that a door had closed as surely as one had opened. Whatever I had been building toward for a year, whatever version of us I'd let myself imagine on quiet nights, that future didn't exist anymore, couldn't exist, was never, in fact, real to begin with. It had been built on an absence of information, and the information had arrived, and it had rearranged everything. I won't pretend that didn't hurt. It hurt in a strange, complicated way that I still don't have perfect language for. Grieving a future with someone in the very same hour, you get to keep them forever in a different, deeper way. I think if I'm honest, I mourned that almost future quietly, alone, over the following weeks, the way you'd mourn anything else you loved and lost. I never told her the full shape of what I'd been feeling before the locket. I decided, and I still believe this was right, that she didn't need that weight added to everything else she was carrying. Some things you get to keep for yourself, not because they're shameful, but because they belong to a door that's already shut, gently, on its own. What replaced it wasn't a lesser thing. I want to be clear about that because I don't want you walking away from this thinking it's a sad story. It's not. It's the opposite of a sad story. What replaced it was my sister, not a friend who felt like family. My actual blood never should have been taken from me, sister, sitting across from me at Sunday dinner again for the first time in 15 years, arguing about pizza toppings with exactly the same stubbornness she had at 10 years old, like no time had passed at all. Chapter 11. Coming homey need to tell you about the day she met our mother again. It happened in my mother's kitchen, the same kitchen, we later realized, where the Locket clasp had been filed down 15 years earlier. My mother had aged the way anyone does after 15 years of not knowing, and Mara, Lily, stood in that doorway for a long moment before either of them moved. "You kept the crescent," my mother said, looking at the locket, her voice breaking on every word. "I never knew why I couldn't take it off," Lily said. "Not once. Even when I didn't remember anything else." They held each other for what felt like an hour, but was probably 5 minutes, and I stood in the doorway and let them have it, because that reunion wasn't mine to be the center of. Mine had already happened in a parking lot with a phone screen between us. Her adoptive parents, and I want to say this clearly, because they deserve it, were not villains in this story. They were never told the full history. The system that failed my family failed to give them the full picture either. And when the truth came out, they didn't flinch from it. They welcomed my mother and me into Lily's life with open arms. And today, two families that should have been connected 15 years earlier are, finally, just one big, occasionally too loud family, the way it always should have been. Chapter 12. Where we are now, it's been a year and a half since that parking lot. Lily. She goes by Lily again now. Mostly, though old habits die hard and I still slip into Mara more often than either of us minds, moved into an apartment 15 minutes from mine. We have dinner most Sundays. She still fights me about pineapple on pizza, and she still wins, mostly by volume. I did eventually meet someone. It took a while. You don't come out of a year like that and just move on by scheduling. But I did, and when I finally told her the whole story, the parking lot, And the locket and everything before it, she didn't flinch either. She just asked to meet my sister. They get along embarrassingly well now. Lily approves of her loudly, which in our family is the only approval that's ever really mattered. Sometimes, late at night, I still sit on that same roof. Lily comes over sometimes and sits with me in a jacket over her pajamas, the same as always, except now there's no fog behind her eyes when I ask her if she remembers. She remembers everything now. The storms, the radio, the plate of banana bread I hated bringing over the day we met when I was 8, and she was the one who opened the door all those years, all along. I think what I want you to take from this isn't the shock of it. Everyone loves the twist. I know that's why you clicked on this. But the twist isn't the point. The point is that love doesn't always show up in the shape you expect it to. Sometimes you spend a year falling for someone, and it turns out what you were actually falling toward, the thing your heart recognized before your mind caught up, wasn't romance at all. It was recognition. It was 15 years of missing someone, finally closing the distance, disguised, for a little while, as something else. I lost my sister once. I don't plan on losing her again. That's the whole story. Thank you for sitting with it. If this one hit you, you're not alone. Share it with someone you'd want to find again. New story every week.